I'm reading again from Stan Gooch's 1973 book, Personality and Evolution. And this is chapter 1, Archetypes and Archistructure, in which he proposes the idea of the archistructure as opposed to just an archetype. And this is that within the brain, mind, whatever you want to call it, is biological structures that define archetypes, which is obviously what Jung had picked up on, was that there are archetypes in the psyche. But Stan's proposal is that these archetypes are actually structural and they express themselves as archetypes in people. So this is sort of on his way to developing the hybrid origin theory. Stan was a Jungian, if he was to be pinned down on which field of psychoanalysis he followed. He'd been through Jungian analysis during his time as a psychologist, and had even in his mind he had been mildly schizophrenic and had cured himself of his schizophrenia early on through analysis and self-analysis. So this is a couple of paragraphs about music and the origins of music culturally in different cultures. With that, we turn to a very different area of human activity, that of music, where again, however, we find much evidence of a paired archistructural form. I propose, taking piano music as my particular example, that the treble or melodic line is the ego, the bass or rhythm line, the self. So Stan, if you don't know about this, Stan's division of the personality is into self and ego. So it's not the same as Freud or Jung would have put it. It's his own version of it. But these develop into the ego is a Cro-Magnon-led personality type, and the self is a Neanderthal-led personality type. So within us is contained both types, and we're dominant in one or the other at different times, or depending on our race, our sex, our age, and whatever other factors. So you're going to find a percentage of people in the world that are ego-led, and a percentage of the world that are self-led, self-driven, and these are more dominant in different groups around the world, whether it's ethnic or racial or whatever it is. But you're always going to find both types in humans. They're just going to be varying degrees. There are many pointers to this conclusion. The bass is played by the left hand, for example. It's true that the more complex melodic work is logically reserved for the more dexterous right hand, but that constellation of circumstances is itself no accident. The repetitive rhythmic bass originates in the percussive drum beat, which in turn, I am not alone in suggesting, derives in some sense from the pulse beat of the human heart. Beat and rock music has a much stronger emphasis on this rhythmic aspect of the whole than has the sophisticated melodic music of Europe. Beat music in the broadest sense of that term is the preferred music of many B-dominant peoples, Negroes and so forth. Obviously, I don't have to say it, it's 1973, so you're going to hear some words that probably people don't use in literature anymore. There are here many further aspects, both fascinating and germane. An alternative spelling of bass is base, B-A-S-E. Skeet derives the word from the feminine form of French basse, meaning low. Both skeet and cline, skeet is anyway, there's a reference to who Skeet is on here, and Klein, I'm probably going to say it is Melanie Klein. Skeet and Klein connect these words in origin to Latin bassus, meaning short, fat, stumpy, shades of Neanderthal. Bass, of course, in any event, meaning also low, underhand, sly, a clear reference to the nature of women and cats, as every dog would agree. And which is the underhand? It is, I think, not necessary to spell out all the double meanings and interconnections of these various terms. There further exists in our music the major and minor keys. Without entering into the full technicalities, the minor key is described as a diminished form of the major. These two keys are, I suggest, whatever else, yet further archistructures of the ego and self, respectively. Many of the plaintive songs of the Jews and other oppressed people are written in the minor key. And here we touch on other behaviours of the self related to these general issues. The self likes to sing its suffering. Compare additionally the blues tradition of the American Negro. The ego, ideally, bears its suffering in silence and without complaint. Again, ideally, it does not break this silence, even under torture. It does not request mercy, nor does it request freedom. It simply takes it or dies in the attempt. Let my people go is the request of the self. And one must report sadly that those who merely ask for their freedom do not usually get it. There is, indeed, a sense in which the self does not want to be free and in which it enjoys the suffering. This is a statement one must make with caution, for though it is, I believe, in a certain sense true, it is the kind of statement which is apt to be only too useful as fascist propaganda. Is one saying, for example, that the Jews enjoyed the concentration camps of the last war, or that the Negroes wanted to be shipped as slaves to America and elsewhere, there often to die of starvation and mistreatment? That obviously goes much too far. Yet there is a sort of truth here. There is a joking question which asks, what does a Jew fear more than persecution? To which the answer is, being overlooked. And something of this is true, I think, also of women. Some women, at any rate, seem willing to accept a good deal of physical violence and other ill treatment from the men they love. The wanting of punishment or suffering has, in fact, obtained clear recognition not only in clinical psychology, but in common parlance with the term masochism. A masochist is a person who, in some sense of the term, enjoys suffering and invites pain. In the equally popular term of sadomasochism, sado deriving from sadism, we have once again the full ego-self equation. It is the ego which takes pleasure in inflicting pain, the self that takes pleasure in receiving it. Full sadomasochism is, strictly, once again, a clinical condition or conditions. I believe personally, however, that mild forms of this dual behaviour are both widespread and normal in our culture. And I would argue the existence of this condition to derive ultimately from the basic sexual behaviours and responses of the mammals as a whole class. Thus we note, for example, that the male cat, guinea pig and so on bites the back of the neck of the female during intercourse and is not permitted to have intercourse by the female unless he does this. That is to say, this action is a releaser in the ethological sense, necessary for the triggering of certain automatic responses in the female. To revert, however, to the minor key and the celebration of suffering in B dominance, not merely in, say, moments of reflection, but at funerals and in religious ceremonial generally, the self vociferously and often hysterically indulges its suffering. I'm not trying to say that there is no genuine sadness at the loss of a loved one at a Jewish or Negro funeral, but there is too a relishing and treasuring of the suffering. This is enshrined elsewhere also, for example, in the paradoxical phrase, a good cry, and women sometimes actually speak of enjoying a good cry. With these remarks, I conclude the detailed consideration of the composite self-ego architecture. I think he makes some really good points in personality and evolution. As with all of Stan's work, there's small pieces of gold littered throughout this mine. His books are a gold mine, and you're going to find nuggets all the way through it. And it's been sorely overlooked. And there is probably a lot of meat and a lot of stuff to think about in regards to our current situation, where it feels like we're sort of approaching some kind of precipice. And who knows, it may be too late already to learn some lessons before we destroy ourselves, but I think that Stan's work does contain some of those lessons that we could learn, if only we can learn them quickly and get them out to people. We could possibly turn some of this sort of toxic culture around.